right. Next in our sequence of mathematics, especially when talking about linear, is being able to write the equations of lines. Now, we have different types of lines. First is called standard form. Now, there's a couple things that are incredibly important when we are talking about standard form. First and foremost, the sign of your x term must be positive. The second important piece to remember when talking about standard form is no fractions. Only whole numbers. So when you are creating your equation, if you happen to have fractions in your equation, then you're going to need to get rid of them before you can call it standard form. To get rid of a fraction simply means to multiply the entire equation that you see by whatever that denominator is. Okay, so the x term, so this a value here, must be positive and no fractions. Now, the other equation that we have is the one that's most familiar to most students, which is that y equals mx plus b. This is slope-intercept form. Now, what we know about slope-intercept form is we know that your m is your slope and the b represents the y-intercept and must be written as a coordinate point. Now, in order to even get either one of these two formulas, we have to have a place to start. And that place to start is this formula here. This formula is known as point slope. The reason for that is because, again, your m is going to be your slope, and your point comes from x1, y1. Now, that being said, we have this y here and this x. Well, if you take a look at y equals mx plus b, here's your y, here's your x. So in other words, they are the cemented variables in each of these equations. Okay, they're the ones that signify the equation. So the only ones that are going to change are going to be y1, the m value, and x1. Everything else stays constant. Now, this form is the form that we can use in order to rewrite either of the other two, meaning I can start with my point slope and end up at slope-intercept or end up at standard form, regardless of the information provided. So this equation here is always considered to be a really good starting point, especially if you have to find the other two equations in your problem. So for example, I want you to find the equation that fits the given information and then write the answer in both. So both is the key word here, standard form and slope-intercept form. So what does that mean? It means we are looking for ax plus by equals c, and we are looking for y equals mx plus b. So I have a point and I have a slope. So doesn't that sound familiar? Point slope needs a point and needs a slope. So I would take this information and I would plug it into my point slope form. So here, this is going to be y minus my y1 equals m times x minus x1. y1 is your y value. So this is going to be y minus 6 is equal to, my slope is negative 2/3, and then it's times x minus a negative 3. Now, one thing that we know is that when you have minus a negative, that is actually the same thing as having positive. Okay? So make sure that you don't lose your negative signs, that you pay attention to what they're telling you. Now here, the first thing that I need to do with this is I need to solve for y. So I am going to distribute this negative 2/3 through. So I end up with y minus 6 is equal to a negative 2/3 x. And then I have negative 2/3 times 3, so my 3's go away, leaves me with minus 2. And then in this case, I need to take the 6 and I need to move it. Because it's being subtracted, to move it says I have to add. So this becomes y equals negative 2/3 x plus 4. And this is slope-intercept, which means I'm partway there. Now, from slope-intercept form, I can very easily transfer over to standard form. So, if I start with y equals negative 2/3 x plus 4, the first thing I would do is get rid of this fraction. Why? Because one of our number one rules about standard form is no fractions. To do that, I'm going to multiply the entire equation by that denominator, which is 3. So the 3 applies to all parts of the equation. So this becomes 3y equals negative 2x plus 12. Now, to put it in standard form, says I need my x's and y's on the same side, so I'm going to move this x over. Because it is negative, to move it says I have to add. So this becomes 2x plus 3y is equal to 12. And this is my standard form. So my first answer is slope-intercept. My second is standard form. Now with standard form, you always need to double check and make sure that you are hitting your two most important rules. Those rules being the sign of your x term must be positive and there are no fractions allowed. If you look at my standard form here, my x term is positive and I got rid of the fractions, so there's no fractions here. Therefore, I check off my two most important boxes and my work here is finished. Now, with that, something to note is that if we start, from point slope, which is y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. Well, our first rearrangement, okay, so if we go ahead and rearrange the equation, so rearranging, says that your first stop is going to come to my slope-intercept form. Which is y equals mx plus b. From there, if we were to rearrange it again, so again, be able to manipulate. We would then be able to go from your slope-intercept form into what we wanted, which is standard form. Standard form being ax plus by equals c. So what you can see here is that we need each equation in order to get to the next. So we have to be able to start at point slope form to get to my slope intercept form to give me standard form. Okay? It's just a really important thing to keep in mind, especially as you're working through any problems that you may be doing. Okay? So when in doubt, start with your point slope form. Okay. So let's go ahead and take a look at another one. Notice this one here, I have fractions. So again, I still want to be able to find the equation that fits, and I need to write my answers in ax plus by equals c and y equals mx plus b. Okay, those are my goals. Well, these are two different coordinate points. So regardless, I have to have a slope, which means the first thing I have to do is find my slope. Your slope is y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. You need to identify or decide which one of these coordinate points is going to be x1, y1, and which one is going to be x2, y2. Again, your order doesn't matter, so you just need to go with what you think and work from there. So x1, y1, x2, y2. So here we have to plug into our formula in order to get things to work. So here my y2 was 9/8. So I have 9/8 minus my y1 is 5/4. And I'm going to divide that by my x2, which is 3/5, minus my x1, 2/3. Now with this, I have to remember my number one fraction rule, which says to combine fractions by addition or subtraction, you need to have a common denominator. So we have to look at the numerator and the denominator here as two separate problems. So first and foremost, I have 9/8 and 5/4. What's common between those is going to be 8, which means for my second fraction here, I have to multiply the top and the bottom by 2, thus giving me the same denominator. If you look at the bottom, again, I have a 5 and a 3, so what's common between those is 15. To get to 15 says I have to multiply the top and the bottom by 3, and then in the other one I have to multiply the top and the bottom by 5. And taking a look at that, we are going to have 9/8 minus, and then here 5 times 2 is 10/8. And we're going to divide that by 9/15 minus 10/15. In continuing to look at your slope here, we have 9 minus 10 is going to give me a -1/8. And then 9 minus 10 again is going to be a -1/15. Negative and negative becomes positive. The rule says take your first, multiply by the reciprocal of the second, and thus my slope is going to be 15/8. So this is what I need in order to even get started. So now that I know a slope, I have 2 points to choose from, doesn't matter which. So I'm going to again start with y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And let's just go ahead and use the one I already labeled as x1, y1. So I'm going to have y minus 5/4 is equal to 15 over 8 times x minus 2/3. So y minus 5/4 is equal to 15 over 8x, and then I have minus 2/3 times my 15 over 8. If you pay attention or look, notice this 15 over 8 here can combine. Both of these would cancel. This becomes a 1, this becomes a 5. And then, if you look at the other direction, over here, I have a 2 and I have an 8. So just like before, 2 and 8 will cancel. This becomes a 1, this becomes a 4. So I have y minus my 5/4 is equal to 15 over 8x minus 5/4. Take this fraction and move it. Since it is negative, to move it says I have to add. So this becomes y equals my 15 over 8x, and that's it. Now the reason that's it is because negative 5/4 plus 5/4 cancels out, and thus leaving me with my first result. And here is my slope-intercept. Now, from this, I have to make standard form. And so here, I have that my y equals 15 over 8x. I need to multiply my whole thing by 8. This becomes 8y equals my 15x. I'm going to take my y and I'm going to move it over. Because it's positive, this means I have to subtract. Therefore, I get 0 is equal to 15x minus 8y. And this right here would be standard form. Alright, last but not least, here I have a point at -2, -13, but my slope here is undefined. So we have to remember, when your m is undefined, what does that actually mean? Well, this means that you have a horizontal line. Not horizontal. I was thinking slope of 0. This means vertical. What this means is that your line is an x equals number equation. i.e., you are only going to cross the x-axis. Therefore, the only point that we care about is your x value. So here, when we are looking at your equation, we simply have x equals -2, and there is nothing else to it. This qualifies as all of your equation because the undefined slope signifies that your line is doing something very specific. In other words, this means that you have a special case. Okay? So you need to pay very close attention. Now, what I was saying by mistake earlier is that what happens if I gave you a slope of 0? So let's say I told you that you had the point -6, 23, and you had your slope was 0. Well, with this, again, you have to pay attention to what we know. When we know that your slope equals 0, again, this means that you have a special case. That special case is the horizontal line. It means that you are going to only cross your y-axis. Therefore, the only point we care about is that y equals 23, and that would be your equation. So you need to pay attention and identify your special cases when you have them. Okay. Now, the last thing that I wanted to look at here is how to write equations of line and solve when you are given a rather lengthy application problem. So here it says, for tax and accounting purposes, businesses often have to depreciate equipment values over time. One method of depreciation is the straight line method, okay, i.e. a linear line. 3 years ago, Hill Construction purchased a bulldozer for $51,500. Use the straight line method. The bulldozer is now depreciated to a value of $43,200. If V equals the value at the end of year T, write a linear equation expression for the value of the bulldozer over time. And then how many years from the purchase date will the value equal 0? Round to the nearest hundredth. So there's a lot of information there that we need to pay attention to. So let's try and start to decipher what it is that we were given. The first thing that we were given is we were given a time. 3 years ago, it was brand new. Now, the other thing that we have been given is we have been given a depreciation value. That says it has now depreciated down to $1,200. Third, we've been given some variables, V and T. So we have to be able to actually put this into equations. So with that, we have to look at what have we actually been given. First of all, we know that X is going to be years. We also know we're talking about 3 of them. This means Y is going to be your dollar sign. So we have to create our 2 coordinate points. So in order to do this, I want you to picture your cell phone. Okay, you've got a cell phone, and let's say you have a 6-year-old son who has taken your cell phone and tried to flush it down the toilet. Now it doesn't work. So since your phone is broken, you need to go to the store. So when you walk into the store to buy a brand new phone, they have to tear it out of the package. At the moment that you purchase the phone, the year that you purchased it is 0. If we apply that idea here, the moment we purchased the bulldozer, my year clock was 0. That gives me the first coordinate point. When the year was 0, the bulldozer was $51,500. Now, 3 years from now, I want to upgrade my phone. And so my phone would have depreciated in value. Well, that brings us to our second. The difference is that our second coordinate is now 3 years later and is only worth $43,200. So I've got two coordinate points that I can use in order to find the equation of a line. In order to get started, I have to find my slope. Again, y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Again, it does not matter which one you choose to be what, and so we could make it easy. So let's do x2, y2, x1, y1. So my slope here is going to be 51,500 minus 43,200 divided by 0 minus 3. Now depreciation means negative in value. So we would assume that we should have a negative slope. So if we do 51,500 minus 43,200, we are going to end up with 8,300 divided by negative 3. Divide that by negative 3 and we're going to get our value. So my slope here is going to be negative 27, 66, and 6 repeating. So we have to be able to write our equations. So we start with y equals mx plus b. And now we need to pay attention to the variables that we've been given. The variables we've been given are v and t. So v is going to be the value at the end of the year. So that means we have to replace y and we have to replace x with v and t. So our equation is going to look a little different. V equals mt plus b. Still the same slope-intercept form, however it's just slightly different. Well, we can start plugging in what we know. So we know v is going to equal my slope, so negative 2766.6 repeating t plus b. B is my y-intercept. If we look very carefully, we actually already have that. Notice my first coordinate point. My first coordinate point, x is 0, and I have a value for y. This means right here is my b. So when I rewrite or write my equation, what I actually have is that v equals negative 2766.6 repeating t plus my 51,500. So here is the equation of my line that I was asked to find. Now the second part says, how many years from the purchase date will the value equal 0? So to solve the second one, simply says 0 equals that negative 2766.6 repeating t plus 51,500. So we have to solve for t. And in this case, you are going to end up with t being 18.61 years. Now, the reason why I rounded to 2 decimal places is because the very last thing that my problem said was how to round. Round to the nearest hundredth. And hundredth means 2 places. So there you have it, a very lengthy word problem broken down into the 2 answers that were required. So if you have any questions, please let me know. Otherwise, remember, math is very much bananas. So just keep smiling, plug away, have tons of fun, make sure you relax, try and enjoy yourself. And as always, I'll see you next time.